And we'll just start. So, hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Circle Up and Get Real, where by now you know that we talk about things that matter with people who matter. And today, that's Duncan So. Hey, Duncan.
Hello, Jody.
So good to see you. So, Duncan and I met, oh, golly, the end of July, beginning of August, as we were both at NLP. We'll talk more about this. NLP Train the Trainer training in Carlsbad, California. And Duncan and I happened to be in a group together the second week of training, and I really connected with him a lot. I think, Duncan, you and I have a lot of things in common as far as what we believe we're here to do to help the world. I'll just say it like that. And I really connected. So Duncan, I'm just going to give you Duncan's bio, and then we'll get into the conversation. Duncan is an expert in workplace well-being and burnout recovery, delivering clinical burnout retreat experiences to help workplace leaders quickly recover from burnout and empower their careers. Now, who doesn't need this? Probably ever, but especially after the pandemic. So I'll just start with that, Duncan, and welcome.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and hello to your audience as well. This is the first time we've connected in this way, and I know you're probably the first person I know from Dakota, actually, surprisingly.
It's funny because
Yeah.
I met a couple people there. Chuki was another of the guys who we met there who said, I don't know anybody from North Dakota. So I'm doing my best to figure out a way to get you all to come to North Dakota. That will be another conversation for us. But Duncan, when I first met you, the first thing I remember you saying is, I was an engineer, and you used the past tense to that. And you did not seem like an engineer to me in the way we connected, because we were having a great conversation. So you started your career as an engineer, and you live in Toronto, Canada. So tell me a little bit about that journey for you.
Yeah, this is our, like, what I call our Genesis story, right? Where everything
Yeah,
begins,
exactly.
and sort of our awakening moment. So it was kind of funny. I call it the traditional, or the norm of, grew up in an environment, quote unquote, Asian parents. Today we call it the minority myth, right? The Asian minority myth, and sort of the same thing, right? So I fell into that trap of that, and parents wanted me to be that professional, right? Doctor, engineer, lawyer, accountant, that type of stuff. And honestly, when I was young, this is before the times of where we are today with smartphones and things, but I loved video games. So this is like old school back in the day. And as a growing teenager, like even as a child into a teenager, I love the idea of the hero's journey. Now, I didn't study that. It was just I love the notion of these video games would bring this sort of growth process, right? That someone can sort of come of age, and you can do things and level up and grow, and really tap into your inner abilities, and sort of, you know, pursue your own destiny in that way. And I kind of fell asleep. There was a point where I remember I wanted to be a video game designer. Back in the day, there was no video game design, and Nintendo was still like a Super Nintendo, and was really, really, really back in the day. And so the next best thing that would also appease my family, or to sort of gain that really connection with them, or keep that connection with them, was to be an engineer. Right? That's the closest thing to that. So I fell into the world of computer engineering, and it was definitely not aligned to who I was. But like most people who are, haven't gone through, or are sort of going through that grogginess period of, I want more meaning in my life or more purpose and stuff, but we just sort of fall asleep and go through the motions. And sometimes, it takes us hitting rock bottom until we just wake up. And so, that was a good almost 15 years, right? So I went through my university education. I was very fortunate. I landed in a company, one of Richard Branson's companies, back in the day, where MBAs were the thing, right? MBAs were the thing. And he was all about entrepreneurship, right? So again, back to the whole mirroring of the hero's journey. Entrepreneurship is, how do you make something from nothing? How do you pursue a dream, and adapt a lot of those philosophies? And so I spent about a decade there, and that was sort of the equivalent of running an emergency room, but for IT, right? So, when systems go down, and I'm the vice president of client care running at me, like, we're blowing $10,000 an hour, right? If we don't get our systems up, we got to get it going. And so, that was my job, and started off literally as a student, as an intern, and building an entire support organization from 0 customers to over 1 million. We were we were grossing over 100 million a year. So, a really high fast startup back in the days where it was all big money, and exited. So that's sort of the moment in my life when that company exited and we got acquired. And because I was the high achiever, the superstar of the company, I was sort of nominated to stay, right? Even my seniors left because we couldn't keep everybody, and I was nominated to stay, and I was very grateful for that. But again, too young and rough around the edges to really understand what that meant. And so as that was graced upon me, I was responsible for that transition. I looked out sort of in that future, and I looked at myself and I'm like, I can't do that. Like, this is, if I have to sit here for the next 20, 30, 40 years, and that is what my life is going to look like, that just didn't work for me. And while today I can say it with sort of calm and being collected, back then out a full-on existential crisis, right? Identity crisis. Who am I? What is my purpose? And at that time, there was no language for the word we call today as burnout.
Yeah.
I thought I was having a quarter life crisis, and the world sort of looked at me as another millennial, right? Like an entitled millennial. And I knew there was something deeper than that. And so it was 2008, 9, around that time. And so it was at that time, what was very popular was this book that turned into a movie called Eat, Pray, Love. I don't know if you've
I have, yeah, for sure.
right? So the idea of, you hit your midlife crisis and you're sort of just letting everything go. I mean, it's very common in sort of that spiritual type of dialogue, let everything go, and you just go out and let the universe take care of you. Now you can imagine that didn't sit well for my left brain as an engineer, right? I still have my engineering ring on. And I'm like, I'm not going to eat, pray, love my way to my own salvation. I achieved my way to where I am today. I'm going to achieve my way out of it. And hopefully, it's like a lot of ego, right? But I was still young, a lot of the ego was there. And I want to achieve my way out of it. And perhaps in this journey, I would be able to engineer. So maybe I'm leaving engineering from my academic lens, my professional lens, but I wanted to keep the essence of engineering, which was about solving problems. And so I had a clear problem, and I knew as sort of the beginning tail end of the millennial demographic that I would be a sort of a light bearer, right? A light bearer to help others who would very quickly be going through this similar thing, that I would be able to, as a leader, to lead by example.
At that time, did you know other people who were feeling that same way, or did you? No. Okay.
Not at all. Not at all. So, I mean, the next best thing for me was, Duncan, go for an MBA. That was sort of the prescription, right? Back in the day, go for MBA. It's just more education, higher learning, and you can be in a higher management position, and you just have more power, more influence, right? So, and I was like, what's the equivalent of an MBA for social change? I wanted to change the world, right? What's the MBA for social change? And they're like, like that. They're like, there is what are you talking about?
Yeah.
And I remember this is before the times of social entrepreneurship, right? So it wasn't even, forget entrepreneurship, I was still like managing businesses.
Okay.
I wanted to be in entrepreneurship, and I wanted to take entrepreneurship as a platform to create social impact. And that's like, other than a few people maybe in California, which they were very, quote unquote hippie movement back in the day, right? I was literally the outcast. My family thought I was just, gone. They couldn't help me anymore. They're like, we're professionals. My father's an architect. My stepfather is a head of gynecology at the hospital. My mom was a nurse, and they're all professions. And they're like, my God, my son's just gone off the cuckoo's nest, right? And we can't help them. And it was very helpless for everybody. So it was a moment of self-discovery. And, having gone through that experience, and sort of now with the frameworks, with everything that I put my intentions to, now sort of looking back and aligning to who I am, my calling, and my work, we have a clear purpose and meaning to really support, a lot of the systemic change that's needed today.
So that would have happened in 2008, 2009. You decided not to get an MBA, or did you go that route as well?
No, so I had a lot of mentors who were all MBAs, call it that way. They're all instructors, professors, University of Toronto. So our MBA program is called the Rotman sort of MBA program. And they were all like, Duncan, MBAs, like, at least I was sort of clear with what I wanted. I wanted to change the world. Yeah. And they're like, yeah, MBAs aren't going to do that.
Okay.
And so I entered entrepreneurship. And then I remember starting my journey as a social entrepreneur. So sort of gave myself that label, right? and just sort of holding that label and just building an identity around that. And it was still very confusing. I remember doing, as an entrepreneur, doing my first pitch for one of the largest incubators here in Canada called the Mars Discovery District. And so they have what's called a social finance forum. And as an entrepreneur, you do pitches, right? You pitch, you're a startup, you do that entrepreneurial thing. And a typical slide in a pitch is what they call an exit strategy, because, you know, VC money, right? You get money in, they invest in you. Everybody wants to move up from C to Series A, B, C, and you hopefully IPO or sell out or something.
Yeah.
And I remember, again, very rough around the edges, lots of ego. I was like, exit strategy, I don't know, Nobel Peace Prize, what do you want me to say? And you can tell, like, consciously, I was in a very different place and very alone too, right? So very different place and very alone. And there was no language that existed for that. There was no framework that existed for that. And everybody who consciously was there thinking like that were sort of the outcasts of the world, right? The crazies of the world. And then, like, you know, fast forward to today to realize I'm still that pioneering crazy, but a lot more mature and sort of mellowed out, with a lot more experience, and still solving the same problems that, you know, when I awoke, right? You know, not to woke culture, but when I had my awakening period, you know, to sort of navigate this and make this a big part of my mission and a big part of my life.
Yeah. So when you, let's go back to 8, 9, were you still employed, or did you just leave without something to go to?
Yeah, so this is a good story for those who today are on that fence, right? Because we're going through that, like, great resignation, the quiet quitting. And so I eventually quit because of incongruence. And so way back then, there was, his name was Tim Ferriss, I believe, and he had created a book called The 4-Hour Workweek.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I followed it to a T. I followed it to a T and still managed to get myself down to a 4-hour work week. And all of the additional time that I had created, essentially, as being an empowered individual, I launched a nonprofit at that point that was focused on figuring out, you know, what today we might call it empowerment, but back then was sort of like figuring out the philosophy of life, right? What is life all about? I mean, remember existential crisis. Who am I? What's my purpose? Don't want to eat, pray, love. How do you find this? And so I created a nonprofit to do this. And even down to 4-hour work week as a nonprofit. I remember doing my first nonprofit campaign. It was I guess you call it modern day mental health campaign. But back then it was Mental Health Awareness Week here in Canada. And I went to a place called Dundas Square, which is equivalent to New York's Times Square in Toronto, as a campaign, and got about 1,300 balloons and filled them out with helium. And the idea was, it was called the Cloud Reach campaign. It was hold on to your dreams and pursue your passion. That was sort of that tagline, right? That was the essence, the core of that. And so you can imagine that was like 2011 or 13, around there. Like, it was still like early to decades of the 2000s. And if I was to type in passion into Google back in the day, you would get adult content.
Yes.
Right? Yes. You were to type passion out, not like today where everyone's a lot more like aligned to that. So I remember doing that, and everybody going through this entire campaign. Like, now there's like statistics at play, right? They're doing this. Everybody won. 90% of them thought it was cute. Like, ooh, I want a balloon. Like, they didn't really get the message they wanted the balloon. And it was the 2 or 3 people that came out, and they were like crying. They're like, oh, we so need this today. And they were so aware of what the grind was, right? The rat race was back in the day. But you can imagine 1,300 balloons, and only like 3 people were aware of that. And I was an engineer. So what I wanted to do was take what Carl Jung called synchronicity and build out synchronicity as a social network. That was where I wanted to bring my work, right? Like, how do you, again, hero's calling, get to your purpose, pursue your dreams and passion, and use an engine, essentially an algorithm, to help determine sort of what are the next steps you need that align to who you are, that can fully express your talent and your beingness. And immediately, that was my product. That was my market analysis. That was my market research. If I'm 1,300 balloons going out there and only 3 people are kind of aware of that, yeah, I'm not going to be investing that much time and energy at that moment as an entrepreneur, because it would have been one of those, what we call a product market fit challenge, right? Or another way we could put it is, Duncan, you're too ahead of your time.
Yeah.
You're too ahead of your time. And so I changed gears. And I moved away from technology and I moved into psychology,
Mm.
right? And so that's where, this was pre-NLP, right? And we can definitely go into NLP conversation
We
with a
will.
lot of
We will.
afterwards. But you can imagine I'm still looking for a theory of change or a framework or a concept that wasn't, fly down to Machu Picchu and pray and hope for the best, right?
Yeah.
So I wanted more than that. And that was a time, when I decided to take a quick break down to California and expose myself in California at that time. And they still have it today. It's called the movement for human flourishing.
Mhm.
So the idea that humans can flourish and what are the sciences behind that. And they have sort of an institute or a learning area called the Esalen Institute for that out on Highway 1 for those from California who know that, and an entire ecosystem that surrounds that. And so I started to really dive deep into flourishing. And it was the first time as, remember, an engineer, right? So very left brain, that they
Mhm.
taught me things to left, right brain, integrate, collect T thinking through the exercise of design thinking way early back in the day. Now it's a lot more popularized. Back then it was still an idea, right? A notion. And then connecting to the heart, right? So then we start to move into heart and energy. That freaked me out. You can imagine energy freaked me out. What the heck is energy? And then I remember my first left brain engineering trying to understand that and just taking it for what it is I literally, this is like, took two metal clothes hangers, and we were experimenting with how our emotions create energetic fields. Like, this is when the Heart Math Institute just sort of launched, right? So this
Okay.
it
Yep.
wasn't as popular as it is today. And I'm walking with these, I'm saying hold specific emotions, different states, and I'll be literally walking with these clothes hangers and watching. I mean, it's like dowsing, right? You're watching
Yeah.
these clothes hangers, and to realize when you're happy, how those fields are so expansive, when what we call
Mhm.
today's coherence, right? How it's so expansive. But when we're fragmented and when we're not coherent, how that energy just gets sucked into your body, right? It's very close. Like, literally, you're walking an inch away from your body for that field to open up. And, that was sort of me now experimenting and building these tools to help me visualize or
Mhm.
gain a material sort of a perspective on what everyone was talking about, like almost borderline esoterically, of energy. But they were, again, all sciences. These are all MDs, all multiple PhDs. Like, everyone was talking this pioneering work. And as a student of life, right, this is me absorbing all of this and really asking myself the questions over time is, how can I integrate this and really answer the mission that I put myself at during that time, which was to essentially fulfill our potential as human beings, right?
Mhm.
How do we fulfill our potential, achieve our potential as a human being?
So before you go any further, so give me a little time reference here. So what's the time frame that took you to California when you got exposed to all this? Was it
That
just an
was
instantaneous, like, I get it, or was there a process for you?
There's a process. And so I hit my crisis around 2006, maybe 7. Oh wait, I take that back. Around 2008, maybe. And then it was 2011 where I was sort of teeter-tottering and really began my work. And it was 2014 I was in California
Okay.
for that work, and still like all energy work. And it was around 2000 and maybe 18, around there, 17, 2016, 17, when I was first introduced to NLP.
Okay.
And I think what was really beautiful about NLP, because they came to Toronto. I think that was their first Toronto workshop. This is Dr. Matthew James, of both of our mentors, right? He's our
Right.
mentor. And so he came in and was, NLP was there since the late 70s. And literally from the 70s to pretty much like the early 2000s, it was still considered pseudoscience, right? Like, NLP was very pseudoscience. If you were to Wikipedia NLP, they'll probably still call it pseudoscience. But what was better, I'd rather have that as pseudoscience than like just energy, right? That was a little bit like I needed something that was a lot more tangible than Machu Picchu, right?
Right. So just
And
for those of you who don't know, neuro linguistic programming is what NLP stands for. And I'm betting, Duncan, you'll tell us a little bit more about that as we go. Since we both have experienced it less as a pseudoscience and more as a real modality for
yeah.
actually flourishing, I'd say, for me. So continue.
Yeah, so I'll shoot this out to a lot of the left brainers out there, the rational thinkers out there, and everyone in between. Is you can imagine I come out from computer engine, so I'm an engineer, but I'm specifically in computers and software around networks and distributed networks. That's my specialty in engineering. And NLP is really interesting because it's almost like if we see a human being, and NLP is the tool to debug the software within you, right? So for those engineers out there, or for those who like their iPhones or their Androids and they download apps onto your phone, right? So you can imagine your phone, your smart device is you, that's your physical body. And the code that runs behind it is the software. And what made the connection for me to do a lot of the empowerment, the healing, the achieving your human potential is when we debug our own code. Sometimes we know as a software person is we want a function, we want to get somewhere, right? That's why we NLP, sometimes we call it the science or the language of how our mind works to get to the results we want to achieve. And by the way, when we don't achieve our results, is too, we were successful at not achieving our results. And so when people are always saying, Duncan, I'm burnt out, am I broken? Am I not enough? Am I blah, blah, blah? I'm like, no, congratulations, we're successful at achieving burnout because we have code within us that are like a function, even though it's all buggy and everything, that is leading to us cause and effect to things like burnout, all the way to extreme things like disease, right? Even NLP has a relationship as a psychosomatic process with the disease model, right? So whatever we are experiencing today in our life, we are successfully achieving that. Now, the only difference is how do we have the tools to intervene so that if we are successfully achieving what we don't want, how do we actually achieve what we do want? And like every engineer, every software coder out there is then you recode and re-optimize yourself and intervene and put in all the different interventions and design and new code, deleting code, installing new code, whatever it is, to eventually get to where you need to go. And so that made so much sense to me, right? You can imagine as a person that lives through cause and effect, lives through design, lives through functionality, empowered me so much to align to my way of thinking, to really solve a lot of the non-linear complex problems we see today, especially when it comes to us as human beings. And just a quick shout out to a practice that, at a level called mental emotional release. And it's so powerful. I'll give you an example of how powerful MER is. It's so powerful that we can clear a trauma and a phobia in as quickly as like 45 minutes, right? For most conventional practices, even like things like EMDR, right, that people know about from a mental health lens, that we're going through a mental health crisis right now, that it's so powerful that you can take a very outcomes-based, evidence-based approach to solve a lot of these really complex issues that people are trying to solve in a very linear way, that there is a process and a practice and a modality that is so effective in helping us to really, realign to who we are, self-regulate. And, that's the healing part, the recovery part, where I focus on right now. But the secret is burnout, in my mind. So my definition is burnout is the opposite of well-being. Burnout is the opposite of empowerment, right? Is when you're not living in a life of well-being, you're not living a life of empowerment. That burnout, as a label, the flame inside you has been extinguished, mismanaged chronic stress, or whatever you want to call it, is sort of the success criteria that you'll follow to get there. And it teaches you, for a lot of people who have gone through burnout successfully on their own, however they do it, you usually look back to say, wow, it's that was a nightmare. But because of that nightmare, it gave me the contrast to teach me what not to do and embark on the things that we do need to do
Mhm.
to re-empower and re-engage ourselves into our lives.
So there was a lot there. Let's slow down just a little bit. I love how much your mind works, and having been with you in person in California, I know how your mind works, and it's fast. I just want to slow it down a little bit for people who might not be on the same wavelength. You mentioned a
Yeah.
couple things when you said it's possible to rewire, reprogram, debug our own systems, and you mentioned the word phobia. And
Mhm.
I know I heard you say when I was in person with you that even allergies and things that
Mhm.
just seem to be bugs within our system can actually be helped, alleviated, rewired. Could you talk a little
Mhm.
bit more about that and how that works?
Yeah. So essentially, psychosomatic being mind body, right? So the first thing for the audience, back to basics, is that our mind and our body are connected. That's why, if, for those who like watching movies or like reading a book, when you get immersed in that, you actually feel as if, right, you're in that moment. We call that immersion, right? You're immersed in a moment, even though it's not real. In other words, our imagination, what we imagine from a body, from a physical lens, they don't know the difference. We respond in the same way. Now, that is you can call it a phenomenon, you can call it that's the way we work, right? Either way, it's real. So a lot of people ignore it, right? The mind is a mind, the body is a body, and just like head in the sand and pretend it's not real, but it's still running in the background. So whether you like it or not, like gravity, right? Whether you believe in gravity or not, it's still running in the background, right? And so the first thing to recognize and appreciate is the mind and the body is connected. And then you can ask yourself, now that we know it's connected, what can we do with it? And so really there are a few parts. Well, I won't talk about the spiritual part. There's four parts. We call it the spiritual, mental, emotional, and physical, right? And so for a moment, we'll put aside spiritual for now because that's the energy part that a lot of people may need time to sort of connect to. But let's talk to the mental and emotional part, right? So mental is our belief system. And for those who ever watch YouTube, for example, I call it YouTube, right? So imagine you sign on to YouTube for the first time. YouTube has no clue who you are. You're doing it for the first time. YouTube is smart because it has like a landing page, like a homepage where it tries to understand what your interests are, what you follow, what you naturally gravitate towards. And then it doubles down to give you things on your feed, right? So, that's sort of like life as well, right? So when we go through life, our feed is the things, our experiences around us. Now, we choose whether we do it intentionally, unconsciously, or unconsciously to line up to the content that we enjoy. And then if we really like it, we will hit the subscribe button, right? So the algorithm's like, oh, cool, I'll get more of that.
Mhm.
And if we really like it, we'll hit the notification bell, right? So not just do we give it to you, we'll notify you when that happens. Now, it's great if you live life with intention, but a lot of us, because we don't sort of wake up and are born with an instruction manual of how we work as a human being, we sort of, on the flip side of empowerment, we call it like when you're at more effect than cause, when your life circumstances controls you more than you control it, right? We currently, and I know things are shifting, that the planet is shifting, is we start to subscribe to things that people tell us to do, right? Hence, you want to be an engineer, doctor, lawyer, or accountant, right? And we do that because we want to survive within our social environment. We don't want to be outcasted. We a lot of us do it for survival. So it's not that we aren't born and disempowered. It's just a lot of us are born into environments that are set up for that. And so for a lot of us on the mental side, we start to create our belief system similar to that of subscribing to stuff, right? And a lot of these beliefs, mental, have a physical body relationship, right? So we hear it all the time, right? Think like at the deepest rooted level, with pretty much I would like loosely say like 95% of my clients, when we do any type of breakthrough, usually lean into the I'm not enough, I'm not worthy, I don't deserve it, I'm not loved. Like somewhere around those at the deepest level until there's no more language to describe that, right? And so you can imagine how these belief systems at a deep level drive us to do things, right? So as an example, when I burned out back in the day, I hit my quarter life crisis back in the day, at the deepest level, it wasn't just I'm not enough, because that was the deepest level subscribe button I hit when I was a child, but it was other beliefs that surrounded like that. As an example, my mom she immigrated from Hong Kong here to Canada with my father back in the day, and very different type of culture, right? So she had that sort of a part of her was very traditional, stay-at-home mom. Your life is all about your kids. And you come into a country where it's about independence and the women's rise of the women's movement, and it just happened that aligned to my mother's natural personality. But you can imagine how much of a conflict she had going through there. And so as a child, when she was going through her sadness and despair and depression, as a young child, 2, 3 years old, I'm there to support mom, right? One, for self-interest. If mom is happy, I'm happy. If mom is sad, I gotta do my best to make her happy. And one of the beliefs that I imprinted as she was sort of figuring out her life was, son, in order to be successful in this world, you have to fight for every breath of air. Mm. I didn't remember that. It was something that, thank you to NLP and these breakthrough sessions, that we have a process that helps you to really regress back to all these different things and release them from your nervous system. And so your beliefs play this huge role because it drives you, right, to do things successfully, whether they're healthy for you or not healthy for you, right? It's just for your survival, whether that survival is to thrive or to survive, right? Right. So there's a mental component to it, and that's where a lot of allergies fall into, right? So allergies, again, there is a moment in the point of your life where you didn't have an allergy. It's not like I was born with that allergy, right? Usually you're not born with the allergy, and somewhere there you realize something's happened, and that's when the allergy started. Right now, it's not some linear, like, eat peanut and then suddenly you flare up, right? It's like at that time when I ate that peanut, or when I had that, whatever, right? Like, with some exceptions, sometimes we do have toxins in our food and stuff, and we have natural reactions. A lot of the time for allergies is at that point, something possibly emotionally happened or something installed in you associated to something physical and begins to manifest, right? And so we get a lot of allergies. So at the master practitioner level of NLP, because we move away from just effective communication, now we move into what we call therapy models. Remember, NLP way back in the day, all doctors, right? It wasn't like they're all PhDs. It wasn't for the Tony Robbins world, right? It was for people who were therapists, right? Tony Robbins, when he learned NLP, start learning it behind the closed doors, literally closed doors, doctors, therapists, those type of stuff. He was behind that door listening to that, and eventually got invited in to really bring a lot of this mainstream. NLP was initially designed as an upgrade, right, for a lot of therapists and doctors and MDs and PhDs out there. And so now that's a lot more mainstream. At the master practitioner level, what makes it so unique is that level of stuff was designed for therapy, right? It was designed to really enhance and deepen therapeutic processes. And so, like myself, I moved beyond just for me and building a model. I want to get deeper into understanding, and you really start to, not just move away from at the level one, at the beginner's level, which is profound as well. And I'm sure, Jody, you can agree with that, right?
Yes.
It's profound as well. You learn things like how to move into states and what our emotions do in a positive way, and maybe collapse a few like irritations and light emotions. But then you can imagine from a therapeutic model, like that is from a beginner level, that's great to get to performance, but from a therapy lens, it may not be enough, may not be deep enough and fast enough and effective enough. At the master practitioner level, you really understand, so that next step, right, is how do emotions play such a profound role? And at the end of the day, really is what emotions are. It's energy with labels. Like, literally, we have feelings inside. That's how nervous system works. We have these feelings. When we're kids, we don't have these labels, but we label them to describe it, for one, ourselves as a language, and two, then to others, so that we can have a unified language. And sometimes our energy, right? So we're moving a little bit of spiritual stuff now. Our energy moves, right? Emotions is energy in motion. Begins to get trapped, right? Begins to get trapped. And it's usually what we call, it's not good or bad or positive or negative, but emotions like anger and sadness and hurt and guilt and disappointment and all the shame and depression and apathy and all those things that, separate us from who we are usually like protective mechanisms, right? And we know this from things like polyvagal science, where we now understand from a emotional relationship with the nervous system that when we move into these fight or flight modes, we're there to survive, and our body is designed to do that. But without really fully understanding how our emotions work, again, back to the whole, our world controls us, our mental consciousness controls us, and now we can talk about the next sort of area is our emotions control us,
Mhm.
right? And that's what starts making our lives a nightmare, right? Not just do we don't have control of where we want to go in life from a cognitive lens, we don't have control over our lives from an emotional lens. And so we get triggered, we're creatures of habit, and we fall into an emotional home that for many people aren't about joy and love and passion and grace and focus and flow, right?
Mhm.
Using NLP can tap into that so easily. For a lot of people without these skills, live a life of anger, right? Live a life today, especially of anxiety and fear and doubt and worry. And that is, and if you were to ask them, they'll say things like, that is just how the world is,
Yeah.
right? So not just are their emotions controlling them, mentally they've condemned themselves, right? We call them limiting beliefs, but that's your worldview. You've basically locked yourself in that worldview, and cause and effect, right? Like software, when you're disempowered essentially, or when you're thinking in ways that will continually separate yourself from who you are, and you lock yourself in emotions that when connected to your biology just sends all these chemicals into your body that shuts down your immune system. There's all these different things. Eventually you will fall into a lot of physical ailments
Mhm.
that we see today. So mind and body are connected. Emotions are sort of that energy in between, right? And so why things like not just releasing things like what we called allergies, then we move things into phobias and we move things into trauma, because all we have is there is a code, a relationship that encodes how we trauma and how we phobia successfully. And what NLP does is specifically mental emotion release as that intervention technique within NLP. What it does is it decodes that from your nervous system so that it can't respond in the same ways anymore, right?
Mm.
It sort of breaks that trigger, breaks that relationship. And then through there, you have the mental emotional bandwidth, the capacity to then connect to the resources that you need, right? And that's sort of where we get the outcome, the therapeutic outcomes that so many of us are looking for.
This is you're helping so much to explain this in a way that I think makes it accessible to anyone, because you said earlier that there's nothing wrong, there's nothing right or wrong, good or bad, there's no judgment to this. Everything you are experiencing in your life is perfectly designed to give you the results that your programming is producing for you. There's nothing wrong here.
Yeah.
It's just that if you decide, I don't particularly love having this phobia or having this allergy or having this result keep happening for me, then what you said earlier is you can either be at effect, which is I'll just let things happen to me, or I can go back to the programming and be at the cause of it instead.
Mm-hmm.
So I love that you are explaining this in terminology that doesn't sound woo-woo and magic and, outside of the scope of reality for many people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're getting real, right? We're getting really real
We
with
are
source.
getting real. That's what it
We're
is.
getting real.
And when you get real about things, I mean, some of the world, you're in Canada, I'm in the US. I mean, politically, there's so much to be upset about and to be angry about and to hold on to those kinds of emotions about. Again, not right or wrong, good or bad. Anger has a purpose at some point. It's just that if we hold on to anger for too long, it becomes resentment and it becomes something that causes us to lash out instead of use it to move to a new state.
Mm-hmm.
And so without that awareness, we sort of do get stuck in a repetitive cycle,
Yeah.
which doesn't allow us to connect at all with not only other people authentically, but with our
Mm-hmm.
true selves.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that's what you and I share. And that's what I remember hearing when you gave some of your presentations and we were talking about the burnout issue,
Mm-hmm.
why corporations, why organizations where people spend so much of their time have become so toxic, and why leaders have gotten stuck in that cycle as well.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to talk a little bit about the organization that you've created that can actually
Yeah.
use all of everything you've been talking
Yeah,
about?
so primarily my focus is on workplace well-being. So broadly speaking, it's on well-being, but the sort of the flip side of the coin is is actually burnout, right? So that's sort of the labels I use to make that work. And it just so happened uh, for burnout. So I didn't start off with burnout, surprisingly. I actually had a school. So I was doing my whole change the world thing back in the day as in systems change. And I had a school in Ghana, of all things, and I was applying things like NLP to help empower youth to really um, bring forth positive change in their communities in Ghana, right? Especially rural areas, right?
How did you
Because
pick Ghana?
it was kind of interesting because I was part of a group called Engineers Without Borders. And there was a program where they're inviting people, different candidates or fellows from all different areas of Africa, all different countries of Africa. And they came to Toronto. And at that time, I was just starting, sort of putting all this stuff together, my own frameworks. And when they invited these delegates over as part of this organization, I sort of volunteered to take them around the social impact and change space of Toronto. And it was really great. So we had a chance to, all the greatest, even like the World Wildlife Foundation, or like all like the top really like civic change and nonprofit and foundations of not just Toronto, but of Canada. We were leading there. And I remember bringing them back to my home, my loft back in the day. And all of a whole group of these delegates were sitting on my couch, and I hadn't had a chance to even tell them what I was doing. From their lens, I was just a volunteer sharing with them all these other great nonprofits and foundations that were out there that were sort of like creme de la creme, right? And then I started to describe the principles, like things like what we're talking about today, like NLP and empowerment and all these different frameworks, and their mind blew. But you can imagine the epiphanies they're having, like there's going to all these great organizations for this type of change, but coming here to learn about empowerment. So I use the word empowerment now, but for them, there's no label for empowerment other than, this idea that we can be the captain of our own destiny. There's a science towards this. And I was literally walking through what we were doing, and they're like, Duncan, we need this, right? And I was looking at my co-founder at that time, and I was like, well, we're in Toronto right now. We're trying to figure out the problem at home. I don't know if we're ready for it yet. But we looked at each other and we're like, you know what? Since everybody is here, maybe these are one of those moments, right? These pivotal moments where we make these big decisions, and it's like, fine, okay, we can't go everywhere, but if we were to decide to go somewhere, where would it be? And it was no joke. It was a rock, paper, scissors moment. And who won was the delegate from Ghana. And so,
Wow.
so we built that. And yeah, our work got recognized by the World Economic Forum. We built a Shapers Hub out there, got recognized by the British Council and the UN as the future of education for rural communities. So, a big accomplishment for the group out there that applied this type of work. We were more facilitators than we were the leaders in this case, but kudos to that team out there that led a lot of this work to make it happen. And it was kind of funny because through that work, the core focus of it, remember, I was still, my ethos, my mission at that time was achieving the potential of human beings, human flourishing. And a big part of my work was what today we'll call social entrepreneurs, but those who are mission driven, that were clear with what they wanted to do and wanted to change the world. And this was the framework to help them do it, right? What I called getting you to your career calling or your mission work. And so we had our third cohort come in, but we had cohorts of students coming in, leaders coming in. And what we found as an interesting phenomena wasn't I come here to change the world from a positive lens, was I'm coming in here to change the world, holding onto my trauma. And we get, for example, like Black Lives Matter, right? So it's part of the consciousness shift where I want to do these amazing things. And the emotions at that time, usually anger, hate, sometimes to an extreme, could be hurt, a lot of shame and guilt. You'll have these emotions as the initial drivers to drive for your being a change agent. And we knew that wasn't sustainable, meaning is you can only go so far until one, you wreck your own body, but two, when you perpetuate the same things, right? You want to stop hate, but then you end up creating more hate, right? One of those things. It's one of those as above, so below type of law of correspondence challenges that we get today. And so NLP was, what I loved about NLP and our work, what we call the breakthrough session, using MER and a whole bunch of other tools, is we begin to really dig down deep to look at sort of, and we call today, right, the difference between abundance and scarcity, or limited thinking and abundant thinking, or,
Mhm.
a separating, the separation or the integration, right? So, or the yin and the yang, right? So,
Mhm.
so we have a lot of these type of patterns. And what's really powerful about NLP was they have the tools to quickly and radically integrate you very quickly. And so it was sort of like an accident, because the school that was teaching all these great, frameworks to get to calling and be a powerful agent of change ended up turning into a therapist office. You can call it that way.
Oh.
And as a school, that doesn't really work, right?
Mhm.
Because we're not a school about therapeutic outcomes. We're a school about learning about leadership development and strategies to do that. And at the end of the day, achieving impact through social entrepreneurship frameworks, right?
Mhm.
And so I launched at that time what today now is called the Burnout Clinic. And that clinic was designed to sort of solve this problem of, if I wanted to go out there and make big change, then we need to really start to clear out that stuff internally, so that we have the mental and emotional capacity to sustain, especially in a lot of the demanding roles like entrepreneurship, where there's a huge psychological toll.
Mhm.
And so that was sort of 2018, 17, 18. And and I know you have that book as well, an organization called Gallup.
Yeah.
So Gallup was an organization in the workplace that really spent almost a decade and a half, if not more, 2 decades, on this notion of engagement, right? Workforce engagement. I will call them the grandparents of engagement, right?
Mhm.
The idea of surveys and what that does, and using that for talent attraction and building culture. And we want to create these engaged cultures, right? In sort of what they would call the future of work.
Mhm.
And so, as a systems change leader, right, future of work, future of education, future of philanthropy, that was sort of my spaces I was working at within. I was concerned as an ex-engineer, call it that way, but I was still a social engineer, maybe an ex-computer engineer. I was concerned because they changed their narrative from engagement and disengagement to burnout.
Mhm. Mm.
And I was like, wow, I mean, I know the Gallup is not some small organization. They're at a systemic change organization. They look at workplace development across the spectrum of the world, right? So they pull that. They're not just some like works in one place and another, right? And not another, right? And so I'm like, so you systemically see that we're going through burnout. Uh, then what that suggested to me was, no matter how hard as a change leader that I would work on my path of my calling, my mission work, that if we can't stop the bleed, then what's the point?
Yeah.
Right. So now I didn't fall into an existential crisis. I fell into this is a big problem. And it just so happened that, we were sort of shoulder to shoulder with a group like the World Economic Forum back then. And they were, uh, they just started that narrative of what they called the fourth industrial revolution, which meant all these big technologies like AI, that's a big one, and
Mhm.
automation and blockchain and so forth, each one would disrupt the way we live,
Mm.
period. And what they had create for their thesis was, as a computer engineer, was technology is neutral, but it depends on the consciousness or the thinking behind it that will drive the change.
Mm.
And so you can imagine now I'm a connector, right? So on my left hand, I had the World Economic Forum. And on the right hand, I had burnout. And I'm like, so with the new technology that's going to come in here, we are going to literally, as a species, drive ourselves to the sixth, or what we call the next, or the sixth mass extinction, right? Because
Yeah.
if our mental and emotional health implodes, it doesn't matter how big you work in the empowerment space, that if we can't stop the bleed, the technology will drive our entire species essentially to oblivion.
Mhm.
So I was like, ooh, okay,
Mhm.
what are you doing? So the question is, what are you doing? You're the think tank, you're the world leaders, how can I follow? How can I help? How can I help, right?
Mm.
How can I help? How can I support? And they're like, yeah, we're not looking at this, right? So, and you connected the dots. So congratulations, Duncan, you connected the dots.
Mm.
So I think you've just self-volunteered yourself to start
Wow.
looking at that, right? And so I was like, okay, let's now call back the future work, right? Let's call these heads of HR who are all about engagement, blah, 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 future of work. And I asked them, so what are you doing about burnout? And they're like, what's burnout, right? So that's a big
Mm.
question, what's burnout? And then I'm like, oh, okay. Well, and I share my story. Just again, there was no definition back then, right? It's not
Mhm.
like, it wasn't until 2000, the pandemic, that the World Health Organization finally kind of labeled it, right? So it was more like, oh, wow, yeah, no, I don't know there is a dopamine effect with technology that does this. I didn't know there was a impact for mental emotional health. And we're just continuing to try to use dopamine as a way to engage our workforce. Right? I'm like, ooh, there's going to be a means to an end to that, just
Mhm.
because you're industrializing engagements. But
Right.
the process of industrializing engagement is going to have some very, very significant mental health problems. And start to begin that conversation. And I asked, as a change leader, as a systems change leader, so what would you do? What sort of what we call the path of least resistance, or a place that we can just slowly lean into? And the unanimous sort of feedback was, well, we usually just say take a vacation, right? Hope for the
Yeah.
best, right? You can sleep it off somehow, right?
Yeah.
And so that's where it began to have been like, okay, in that case, because we know there is a stigma in mental health, why don't we take what we do with NLP, especially at the master practitioner level, to clear stuff so quickly, and connect that to the vacation model? And
Mm.
so what would happen, unlike say more traditional lines of therapy, which usually are a very long time, right? So what makes this work is because how quickly we can
Mhm.
create change, right? So we can mask our change work within a vacation, 1 week vacation, right? All inclusive. They get everything they can YOLO on their Instagram or their Facebook. But really, they're there for those 2 days for not just for a transformational experience, because this work is very transformational,
Mhm.
but because it has a spiritual, mental, emotional, and physical component to it, all integrated, it
Mhm.
has a very transcendental component as well. And so a lot of people come in and have this really deep transcendental experience where they connect back to who they are, and they're able to flush out from the nervous system things that separate them,
Mm.
and then have now the new liberated mental emotional capacity so forget the idea of burnout. They're like, what the heck is burnout, right? So
Mhm.
it's gone from their language patterns internally, and now they have the capacity to be like, okay, what do I want to do in my life, right?
Mm.
All the way from if you're in HR who's like what 98% burnt, like, well, HR is basically purely burnt out, right? They're up there with doctors and nurses and frontline workers, right? Is really get clear with my where I need to go and how I can harness my talent at the deepest level to create not just the change, but the support, especially for HR leaders, the support they need.
Mm.
Or if you're an entrepreneur, is I had come in here through pain that wasn't sustainable. Now that I've done this breakthrough, that I'm able to have this next echelon of thinking and a relationship with powerful emotions like joy and passion and love, right? Not these woo-woo, like follow your bliss and find your passion. None of that, right? Is instantly we teach you the skills to connect with that. And through a new lens, a cleaned up lens of where you need to go at the deepest level, connected with the skills of those what we call high performance states, right? Then you can start to really materialize the things we're asking for, right? The spiritual things we're asking for today, like meaning
Mhm.
and purpose, right? And well-being, right? These are literally the foundation blocks, the recipe of why we are going through what today we call the Great Resignation, and why Generation Z is calling out the quiet quitting, and why even national states like China, for example, have movements like the lay flat movement, right? It's because they're so helpless in their life that they've
Mm.
just given up, fallen into apathy, which is an emotion. This is disengagement with all the limiting beliefs and blocked emotions. That is until they clear that, do they really see the proverbial light, right? Not this Machu Picchu thing, but the
Right.
proverbial light where they're like, this light is inside me, has always been inside me, but I can feel it from a neurological standpoint. It's not a cognitive standpoint, but I can feel it within my body and bones,
Yeah.
right? Sometimes we might call this is my soul. This is what I meant.
Mm. So what I'm hearing, I mean, I already know this because I've
Mm,
experienced the same thing, and it's been difficult trying to find the words to
mhm,
that don't sound woo-woo because
mhm,
people only know their own reality. And I know a quote just came to me as you were talking. People won't change until the pain of changing becomes less than the pain of staying the same.
yeah.
And I think in my world, a lot of people are pretty content with their pain.
Mhm.
And they are like, no, the it's too scary. The unknown is too scary for me, even though it could be better than what I currently know. Is there a phenomenon? Is that called something?
Yeah, so that's sort of, so there's two parts of that. So the first part is we call it agency, right?
Mm,
Is as long as they know, and this is where the world implodes, right? Most people have an implosion moment here is as long as you know that if you want to stay safe, that is your choice. That is partly agency because we want to give you agency and partly free will, right? You're
mm,
given free will to make those choices. Otherwise, even me telling you to be healthy is dictatorship, right? It's taking away your freedom and
mm,
agency. So recognizing that with agency, even though you might feel that the world outside you is controlling you, that you've made the decision to do that.
mm,
And I think that's where empowerment, and even books like Think and Grow Rich, that they spent a lot of time moving the US out of depression pretty much, right? Back in the day, was
mm,
the idea that you are the captain of your own destiny. And for a lot of people listening, might be the aha moment, right? Because we all have those moments like, oh, wait a minute, do I really need to wait for the pain to be so intense? And I say pain is so intense, I mean existential crisis,
mm,
health, heart attack, a divorce, right? Your kids are leaving you, you're going bankrupt, one or all of the above, right?
mhm,
All compounding at one time, knowing that with all of those compounding pains, that the recovery process will be even longer.
mm,
And so you're at and for the audience listening, you're at a choice right now because we are going through a period of the great resignation. We are going through a period of the quiet quitting, right? We are going through, and sort of my prediction is if we continue going through this path, like you said, Jody, is when the pain is greater than our comforts and we change, is the next level is what we call workplace trauma, workplace PTSD,
mm,
right? Because that is just cause and effect, right? If you keep suppressing yourself this way, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when,
mhm.
right? So this is a ticking time bomb, is when are you going to decide to make that change? And where I hope this podcast can give a little bit of a path, a light for those to consider to walk as an option. Remember, it's choice, right? As an option is there is an easy path, there is an easy button, right? And both of us know that. Both of us have walked through that journey, looking back with now the skills and the experience to help us through that quickly,
Mhm.
right? And so for those who are listening and you're like, huh, interesting. This is the time, this is the opportunity to reach out, right? Because we are going through a lot of these struggles. You don't have to do it alone, right? It's not an alone process. And there are people out there, not just us, but a lot of people outside who have gone through it before successfully. And is a time to ask yourself, you may not need to want to change now, but at least have the question for yourself is, if I were to change, let's begin to focus on what change looks like, and of the different paths of change, which one would I want to experience in my life?
So good. So with that then, Duncan, how would people find you if they wanted to have a deeper conversation about this and find out more about what you do for HR groups?
Yeah, so LinkedIn is the place to be for me. That's where I live on the social network. So Duncan So, do check me out on LinkedIn. My more practical engineering solution is you can check out a website called burnoutrecoverychallenge.com. I worked on that for the entire pandemic because from a workplace lens, I've done way enough lunch and learns to learn that that doesn't create change, creates awareness and a checkbox. But if you really want to create change, the Burnout Recovery Challenge, uh, tried, tested, and true, is already an employee experience that we've designed with a full playbook, a full 99 plus page playbook that will take you step by step by step of how do you create an amazing employee experience to specifically get your teams to recover. And for those, if you're in HR, your workplace leader, you're listening to this now, yes, there is a big difference between prevention and recovery. A lot of us pretend that, we know we're burning out, but we'll continue to apply prevention practices, more self-care, more sleep, more vacation, all these band-aid solutions. Great for prevention. There is a completely different tool set when it comes to recovery and self-regulation. And this program is designed from the lens of NLP and the lens of a performance clinic to make that effective with clinical outcomes. So do check that out. It is burnoutrecoverychallenge.com/workplaces if you're a workplace leader, or just burnoutrecoverychallenge.com if you're somebody that is going through burnout right now and wants to experience the program yourself.
That's so great. Duncan, this has been a pleasure. I know we need to have a second part to this when we can even talk more about lots. I would tell you, I'll just leave a little teaser here. Duncan helped me with some things when I was with him that I couldn't get in the big group with the whole training that we were both. Duncan took me outside, helped me work through something. And I'm telling you what, Duncan's the real deal, you guys. So please take him up on this, and I'll make sure it's in the notes so that you can get in touch with Duncan. Duncan, thank you so much for all the work you're doing. Thank you for going first, even though it couldn't have been easy when you were, going through this yourself, because there are people there coming right behind you, me included. And I know together we can do a lot more than either of us can do on our own.
All right, so, you're welcome, and thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. And so everybody, as always, go be real. See you again. Bye.
Bye.